14 years of war. Millions of civilians were massacred, cities burned to the ground, chemical weapons used on defenseless villages, and an event so horrific that historians still argue over exactly how many people died, because the true number might be too devastating to fully calculate. This is the Second Sino-Japanese War, the brutal conflict between China and Japan that began years before World War II even started in Europe, and one that laid the groundwork for one of the deadliest theaters of the entire war. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a like if you want more deep dives into history that deserves more attention. And I want to know, where in the world are you watching this from tonight? Drop your country in the comments. I read every single one. Let's rewind to 1937, when tensions between two empires finally exploded into full-scale war. By the 1930s, Japan had already been expanding aggressively into Chinese territory for years. In 1931, Japanese forces staged an incident to justify invading Manchuria in northeastern China and established a puppet state there called Manchukuo. China, weakened by internal conflict between the nationalist government and communist forces, could do little to stop it at the time. Tensions simmered for years afterward. Then, on the night of July 7, 1937, Japanese troops conducting military exercises near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing clashed with Chinese soldiers after a Japanese soldier went briefly missing during the drill. Shots were fired. Both sides blamed each other. What should have been a minor, containable skirmish instead spiraled rapidly out of control within days. Within weeks, full-scale war erupted between China and Japan. Japan, possessing a far more modern and mechanized military, launched a massive invasion aimed at conquering key Chinese cities and forcing a quick surrender before China could properly mobilize. China's nationalist leader, Chiang Kai-shek, made the difficult decision to resist rather than negotiate, setting the stage for one of the longest and bloodiest wars of the 20th century. A war that would not officially end until 1945, nearly 8 years later. Nobody at the time could have imagined just how catastrophic the coming years would truly be, or how deeply this conflict would scar an entire generation. The first major confrontation came at Shanghai, China's largest and most cosmopolitan city, home to foreign concessions, international banks, and a bustling population of millions. Chiang Kai-shek committed his best-trained troops to defend it, hoping a strong stand would draw international attention and support from Western powers, watching nervously from the sidelines. The battle raged for over 3 months, from August to November of 1937. It became a brutal, grinding urban war, often compared to the intensity of trench warfare from World War I decades earlier. Soldiers fought street to street and building to building, with staggering casualties mounting on both sides as the fighting dragged on. China ultimately lost Shanghai, and lost it at a horrific cost. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed or wounded in just a matter of weeks. But the fierce resistance genuinely shocked Japanese commanders, who had expected a quick and easy victory across all of China within months of the initial invasion. Instead, Japan now faced a much longer, costlier war than anticipated, and their growing frustration would soon turn into one of the most horrifying atrocities of the entire 20th century. If this is hitting you hard already, make sure to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to understand this history. After Shanghai fell, Japanese forces advanced rapidly toward Nanjing, then the capital of nationalist China and a city of enormous symbolic importance. The city fell in December 1937. What followed over the next 6 weeks has become known as one of the darkest atrocities in modern history, the Nanjing Massacre. Japanese soldiers, some accounts suggest under direct orders and others suggest through a total breakdown of military discipline, unleashed horrific violence on the civilian population of the city. Estimates of the death toll range from over 100,000 to as high as 300,000 people killed within just those few weeks. Mass executions were carried out along riverbanks and in open fields. Countless women were subjected to horrific sexual violence throughout the occupation. Homes and businesses were looted and burned to the ground. Survivors described weeks of unimaginable terror throughout the city, with no safe place to hide. International witnesses, including foreign diplomats, missionaries, and journalists who remained in the city despite the danger, documented much of what occurred, providing crucial evidence later used in war crimes tribunals after the war finally ended. The Nanjing Massacre remains an intensely painful and, in some circles, disputed chapter of history to this day, with the exact scale of the atrocities still debated between historians in China and Japan, though the core events themselves are extensively documented by multiple independent sources. Following the fall of Nanjing, the war settled into a brutal, grinding war of attrition across the vast expanse of China. Japan controlled most major coastal cities and railway lines, but China's enormous interior, difficult mountainous terrain, and sheer population size made total conquest nearly impossible to achieve. Chiang Kai-shek retreated his government inland to the city of Chongqing, which endured relentless Japanese bombing campaigns for years, some of the earliest large-scale aerial bombardments of civilian populations in modern warfare. Meanwhile, in northern China, communist forces led by Mao Zedong waged a parallel guerrilla campaign against Japanese occupation, even as tensions between nationalists and communists simmered dangerously beneath a fragile and uneasy wartime alliance. Japan employed devastating tactics throughout its occupation, including the notorious three-alls policy in certain regions, meaning kill all, burn all, loot all, aimed at eliminating any possible support base for Chinese resistance fighters hiding among the population. Entire villages were destroyed without warning. Japan's Unit 731 also conducted horrific biological and chemical weapons experiments on Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, among the most disturbing documented war crimes of the entire 20th century. Meanwhile, in 1938, in a desperate attempt to slow Japan's rapid advance, Chinese forces deliberately breached the Yellow River dykes, flooding vast areas of farmland to physically block the path of Japanese troops. The resulting flood killed hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and displaced several million more, a devastating example of the impossible choices that war forces upon desperate and cornered leaders. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you're learning something new. It truly helps this channel keep telling these forgotten stories. By 1941, the conflict in China had already raged on for 4 brutal, exhausting years. Then, in December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States directly into the war. Almost overnight, the Second Sino-Japanese War merged into the much wider Pacific theater of World War II. China suddenly found itself allied with the United States, Britain, and other allied powers, receiving crucial military supplies and support through dangerous supply routes like the Burma Road, and later the treacherous Himalayan air route known as the Hump. Fighting continued relentlessly across China for years afterward, with major battles, brutal occupation, widespread famine, and staggering civilian suffering continuing almost until the very end of the war. Estimates suggest that Chinese civilian and military deaths throughout the entire conflict range from 14 million to as high as 20 million people, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in all of human history, a toll often tragically overshadowed in Western retellings of World War II. The war finally ended in August 1945, following Japan's surrender after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the wider Pacific War to a close. China had endured 8 brutal years of full-scale war, and effectively 14 years of conflict when counting from the original invasion of Manchuria back in 1931. The scars of the Second Sino-Japanese War remain deeply present across East Asia even today, shaping diplomatic relations between China and Japan generations later. Memorials across China stand as permanent reminders of the immense suffering endured during those long years, and the tensions surrounding historical memory of this war continue to influence politics in the region to this very day. It's a story of unimaginable brutality, but also of extraordinary resilience, a nation that refused to surrender despite facing one of the most powerful and modern militaries on Earth at the time. If you learned something today, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and follow this channel for more forgotten history from around the world. And once again, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from right now? I genuinely love seeing how far this story reaches. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.